As Dat mentioned, I've been a long time participant of InboundTO. I don't think I hold the record for a most number of inbounds, but I've probably been here maybe 10 times or so in the last year and a half. So really great that I can give back and share some expertise on a subject I know something about, which is Facebook advertising. So just a little bit more about me. I'm going to see over here. So as Dat mentioned, former social media manager at TIFF. So on this side, okay. Okay, good. So I was there for almost 5 years, managing all their social media marketing. So really great opportunity for me to be able to build up the brand's presence online. And I worked mostly on their year-round programming, so a lot of people know us as the film festival, as I'm sure you've seen the celebrity photos this week and lots going on in Toronto. However, we do a lot year-round, and so most of the time we are trying to bring people into the building. TIFF Bell Light Box is the permanent home of the festival. We have 5 cinemas, so there's films being shown in the building every day, and we bring in a world-class exhibition. So part of my job was being able to bring new audiences to the building and using online marketing to do that. So, before you go back, so before that, I'm a big WordPress enthusiast. So I actually worked on the first WordCamp in Toronto back in 2008, and again in 2010. And I'm currently working with Devs Without Borders, which is an international development not-for-profit, and we're putting on the first international development hackathon that's going to be teleconferencing people in Nairobi in with the teams in Toronto, so that's something unique that's happening this November. And I love mac and cheese. Does anyone else love mac and cheese? I think I claim to be the most obsessed person in Toronto. I've tried most dishes, so come talk to me afterward and I'll tell you which one's my favorite. All right, so getting into it, there's so many reasons why I love Facebook advertising. And as Matthew mentioned, there's a lot of people on Facebook. There's nearly 1 billion daily active users on the site. So you know that your market is on the website, and you could target so many different types of people. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about hyper-targeting, but the other reason why I love it is that because it was driving so much traffic to our website. So whether it be through paid acquisition strategies or organic posts, we saw most people coming from Facebook than any other social network, and that was 5 times more than Twitter and maybe 10 times more than a Pinterest or Reddit. So really great to generate traffic from. And next slide. It does come with some challenge. So I like to think as Facebook as the courting stage of a relationship. So you're building awareness about your brand. You're not really ready to sell to your customer, but you're creating awareness, opening up lines of communication, and getting ready to sell. But people aren't necessarily going to Facebook to search for your product. They're there to be social. They want to see what their friends are doing. And so unlike Google, where they have maybe more purchase intent, Facebook is more about discovery. Next slide. So I'm going to run through 8 guidelines, things that I've learned on the job through my experience of putting ads together. Starting with the first, next slide. The first one, which I think is super important because Facebook is a social network, so inherently your ad should be social. And I like to work within the medium of Facebook. So if you go to the next slide, here's a fun example of 2 ads that I created for a Back to the 90s series. So if you're a fan of Cruel Intentions or Empire Records, some of these cult classics from the late 90s, you'd probably know this series. And these were meant to encourage dialogue and discussion around the film. So as Matt mentioned, you need to create a feeling with your audience, and that's certainly what we achieved through these ads. So I wanted to bring out feelings of nostalgia. So I guess I have more experience with this, but I grew up with YM magazine and 17. So I really tried to play off of that girly crush, like, oh, were you a Luke Perry fan, or were you Troy from Reality Bites? And all obviously targeting the right demo. So we looked at people who were of the I think it's 28 to 37-year-old audience with a female skew, people who lived in the downtown core who were more likely to come visit TIFF Lightbox, because we found through research that people within a 10-kilometer radius of the building were more likely to come. And this one on the left here was, do you remember these characters from the 90s? And which 5 characters would you bring to the series? So not only is it polling the audience, but we saw people tagging their friends and saying, oh, hey, Kimberly, let's check out Empire Records. Haven't seen that since 1997. Or they would comment like, oh, I would bring these 5 characters with me. So it really created a lot of attention, and we got people sharing our posts for us. So really they were doing the work for us on our behalf. Next slide, and here's another one. Similar fun series, and we pitted 2 films against each other. So we had Patrick Swayze in Dirty Dancing and Kevin Bacon in Footloose. And so these 2 films went up against each other. So not only did we poll people in the cinema, but we also polled them online and had people facing off against each other and sharing their reasons why they were Team Swayze or Team Bacon. And we also had an expert who we grabbed a testimonial of her and used it as content to post on our Facebook page, and used this as an ad as well. So we used the video and repurposed it for our advertising campaign, and it worked really well. We had lots of people commenting, saying why they were Team Bacon or Team Swayze. Next slide. So talking about the hyper-targeting options, like speaking of targeting parents, that was one thing that we did. So if you go to the next slide, there's so many different options. So we have a children's film festival, and so one of the things that you could do is target people who have kids who are 0 to 3. So if you want to target very specific audiences, you can do that. If you're a local pet shop owner and you just want to talk to the people within the immediate vicinity of your shop, you can narrow in on postal codes. So there's plenty of options, and not only that, but there's custom audiences. I don't know how familiar you are with that. Does anyone use custom audiences? A little bit, okay. So lots of retargeting options. You can pair your Excel data from your email lists with your Facebook. It scrubs the Facebook profiles and matches it to create custom audiences. So you can really get very granular in all those targeting options. So we like to target by films, by actors, and if we wanted to find similar audiences, you start typing in a film, and it will recommend other similar films. So that's something that we like to work with as well. Also, a little hint too is that you can go to Google Images and find similar themed ideas too that helped.
What do you think about hyper-targeting?
Hyper-targeting, so just finding very specific niche audiences for your Facebook campaigns. So for us anyway, we wanted to not spend a ton, so we wanted to find those really great qualified leads. So we wanted to focus in on a very specific group. So we weren't, targeting or blanket targeting a lot of people.
Can you target by an email address? Like if you have an email list, you'll appear on the page.
Yeah, you can. Yeah, that's a newer option for Facebook. Yeah.
And personal, not business.
If you have an email list, you can export that data from your MailChimp or whatever, and you can create something through Facebook ads. And we like to look at secondary audiences. So not only do we target people who were potentially interested in our films based on the age bracket in which they grew up with, but the generation after. So talking again about the Back to the 90s series, we looked at the group that maybe didn't grow up with the films, but they grew up with Pretty Little Liars or Gossip Girl. So for the instance of Cruel Intentions, I used copy like Cruel Intentions, the original Gossip Girl, to try to attract interest and targeted people of the 13 to 23-year-old demo. I learned that your hunch is not always right. So in the next slide, I have an example from the George Takei documentary. Is anyone a Star Trek fan? So my hunch was that I thought the Star Trek fans would have the most affinity to George Takei because there's a lot of interest. People tend to follow the characters and the actors around and like everything they do. That was my belief anyway. But it turns out that the group of the documentary film fans were reacting much better to the ads than any of the other groups. So the good thing is that you can test out different audiences to see what works. We had a specific copy and call to actions for each of these groups. And based on interest, I decided to pause. You can turn off your campaigns and focus in on the group that's working best for you. So I decided to put all my resources into documentary film fans.
So you were doing all three?
Yeah, simultaneously, yes, at the beginning.
For how long until you realized?
For like maybe 24 hours, if that.
Okay.
Yeah, enough time to see whether it was working. And it was a significant difference in that I decided to pause the other two campaigns.
So if you're going to target, say, documentary film fans, those would have been people that had already expressed an interest in TIFF, or they were somewhere in their Facebook profile within that geographic radius had clicked something, like something that had an affinity with documentary film?
Yeah, so they would have associated themselves by liking a page about maybe they liked hot docs, or other documentary films of similar nature or theme. So we targeted by interest in this case. Other times we've done that where we've targeted just people who like our Facebook page, so TIFF fans.
So you were, a lot of the time though, it was outside your own likes.
Yes, exactly.
But they had to be within the geographic area.
Yeah.
And there had to be some, so you had to come up with a list of different kinds of documentary likes that they might have.
Yeah, and that's where the work comes in,
Okay.
the research. Yeah, yes.
Great so far. I find this really fascinating. I have a question. Do you use this great information to form offline advertising that was like more expensive? Because like I could see, maybe you chose a different one offline, which is a lot more expensive than 24 hours or 40 hours to know that it's a documentary fans that when you come see his new film.
Mm-hmm.
It's a different demographic and personality.
Yeah, it's a good point. I don't know if we actually did take that information, but I mean, by the time these ads were up and running, most of our traditional marketing support was already in market.
Right.
But yeah, no, it's definitely something that you can learn from to apply to your offline marketing for sure. Yeah, this next slide. So you can see how specific you can get. So there's maybe 3 different images you're testing, but within those, there's 3 different titles, and then within that, there's 5 different interests for each group. So if you have the time, you can get very specific and test so many different variables.
Would this be a common matrix for how you would plan a campaign?
Yep, yep. Yes. Next slide. So talking about organic content, and one thing that I like to do was test out our content on the Facebook page first. So if it was doing well, I would use a sponsored story. I know Matt was talking about how it's better to go into your Facebook ads manager and create ads from there, which I did most of the time, but oftentimes you're getting that social proof first on the Facebook page, so you're not starting from scratch. If something's working already, then you can lift that with some additional financial support. So this was a behind the scenes video that took off. It was about our Stanley Kubrick exhibition, and people were really reacting to it and sharing it. So I decided to give that a lift with some sponsored posts. Relevance score was something that I really paid attention to. So this, if you're not as familiar with, is a score that Facebook gives to your ads in which based on whether or not they perceive your ad to be more relevant or less relevant to the audience you're targeting, will give you a higher or lower score. So next slide is, I use the benchmark of 7. So if it wasn't at a 7 or higher, I would turn off my campaigns or pause them and figure out how I can rework them to improve that score. And not only that, if you have a higher score, you're not going to pay as much, so your cost per click come down, which is another benefit. For us, the visual is so crucial. You could tell what was working, what was not, because on the left here, we have a more candid photo of Bill Murray. This is him at one of our film festivals a couple years ago. He has Twizzlers in his pocket, and he's eating TIFF popcorn. This is very Bill Murray. And on the right here is a film still from the film Broken Flowers. So my task was to promote the films of Jim Jarmusch. If anyone knows that filmmaker, he's more niche. So I had to think of a more mass appeal actor who starred in his films. And so I used the face of Bill Murray for the campaign because he's going to draw more interest. He's widely known and liked across the internet. So generally, if you see Bill Murray in your newsfeed, you're more likely to stop and pay attention. So not only that, but I find that using more candid images gets more attention. It certainly got a lot of reaction. People commented and shared on that campaign. And another thing I like to do is create specific ads for the mobile experience versus desktop. On the next slide, I think, oh, okay, well, I have, the idea is that video is 3 times more likely to be viewed on a mobile device than on desktop. So for us, we really worked in our rich content, so all the video content that we produced in-house, that worked mostly well on our mobile device ads. So using that in mind, I decided that we were going to upload trailers, and you have you have a very small chance that your ad is going to be, well, people will still comment on it, but the video auto plays in a mobile device. I don't know if you noticed that, doesn't in the desktop experience. So desktop is more feature rich and you have more wiggle room. You have the chance to maybe put more copy, but on a mobile version, it's very small, so you have to use images that aren't as cluttered. So just thinking about the 2 different properties and what kind of content you want to feature on each. Yes.
Now that you mentioned both different devices, do you find that, say, things like Facebook Purity or any of those blockers, do you see a difference between the 2 of them on a mobile because it's not on there, but it is on a desktop, for example?
What was the Facebook Pure?
Yeah, any ad blocker, basically.
Ad blocker?
Yeah.
Like,
Facebook Purity blocks a whole lot of different ads, right? So
Okay.
you only see posts by your friends, for example, right? Same thing as ad blocker or whatever else, right? But they don't have them on mobile yet.
Oh, okay.
So I'm just wondering if you see a difference between both when you do the same campaign.
Does anyone know? I don't have any
It's hard
experience.
to tell. It's hard to tell how many people have ad blockers installed or not. So
Don't have
Yeah.
it on their phones, so.
I did have a question actually
Yeah.
about mobile device type though. So do you ever see a difference between iOS versus Android response rates as well as cost per clicks?
I didn't really pay too much attention to that, to be honest. It was more about whether a video is going to be watched more, or we're going to have a better click-through rate with video versus photo.
Okay.
But it might be something to look at if you know, if that's important to you.
With the video, were you also then similarly targeting a specific demographic, a specific audience for that video based on location, age, and another interest? And then what you're offering was a video instead of a still?
No, I think we'd go after the same target. That targeting wasn't as crucial as the content itself. So just knowing that the more visual rich content worked well on mobile was what we were trying to go after. So using the same targets, yeah. All right, next slide. I think is it, actually. That's all.
So we have a 5-minute Q&A.
Yes.
Melissa, I've got a question about photos. So that Bill Murray photo, for example, how do you ensure that you don't fatigue the audience, essentially? That he had a very candid pose, so are you looking for other candid photos like that to kind of rotate through, cycle through?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially if we're going after the same audience. We don't want to use the same images, and that goes for your organic content too, obviously.
Cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you did all the in-house, right?
Mostly, I'd say 80%. And by the time I left, it was I was the person responsible for doing a lot of it. So we had an agency we work with, and they did more of the larger festival campaigns where we didn't have as much resources in-house. But yeah, throughout the year, I was doing most of it. Yeah.
Actually, that was my question. So how big was your team? Just you yourself?
I had a full-time assistant, and so it was a team of 2. Yeah.
Wow. Amazing.
Yes.
What are some instances of hyper-targeting working like really well in a way that we wouldn't expect? Like a hack, you know?
Yeah. Well, I think going after parents, like for any of the children's films that we had, especially if you're targeting by specific neighborhoods. So you can use the research that you have through, your market research surveys, and use that to, find the targets that you need to use on Facebook. So if we know that parents from certain neighborhoods are most likely to attend the Children's Film Festival, you can layer that with parents of kids who are 5 to 8 versus 0 to 3, because we had films of varying for varying ages.
How much does that work with, on Google Analytics, you have those categories, your community categories of interests.
Mm-hmm.
How does that line up with Facebook ads in those categories of interests?
Can you give me an example of an?
They'll be like movie lovers.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Like all those categories on that.
I tried to avoid those blanket affinity categories. I know what you're talking about, like documentary film fans as a whole. I try to find specific films to target, and it's a lot more work, but you see a better return on your investment.
In order for the Facebook ads to work, specifically to support the film festival, would someone have to be on Facebook a certain optimum amount of time in order for them to see the ad? If someone was just an occasional user, maybe 5 minutes a day versus 20 minutes or a couple hours a day, did you have a sense that would the ad appear the moment they went on to Facebook, or would it be a question of your ad would cycle through?
I think that's a question for Facebook. I think it depends. You can look at your frequency and see how many times it's appeared, multiple times for one user, I think. But I think it's totally up to Facebook after you create your ads. Who sees them. You're targeting specific people, but it's not guaranteed that
It's not guaranteed that they would see them at the time that they were on Facebook. In other words, the scheduling of the ad for that user would be something that Facebook controls.
Well, you can schedule.
Pay a premium to increase the probability of the ad appearing.
That's another targeting option. You can actually decide what time of the day to schedule your ads. So if you think your audience, for instance, like parents or of newborns that are maybe up at night, if you want to schedule your ads for 2 a.m, you could do that. So yes.
Have you ever came across with a situation that you need to grow the followers on a Facebook that started with 0 followers? Using Facebook ads to grow fan page likes, yes.
In other words. Yeah, we did that a little bit first, and then I tried to get away from that because I think you're going to grow your Facebook audience by creating Facebook ads for all these individual groups. And honestly, it's a vanity thing with that. And I think, Taylor Swift has fans, but you should try to build up your audience by creating really great content and using some of that organic content, because as Matt mentioned, it's a pay-per-play model nowadays, and we saw definitely a really big decrease in our organic reach. So we had to supplement that with, we had to boost some of our posts with some paid support behind it. So, yeah. Yes?
What do you think are the top skill sets and capabilities of someone who would be successful in Facebook advertising campaigns?
I think anyone's capable of doing it. You have to have patience and try different things, and the great thing is you don't need a big budget. You could start with $100 and see what works. So just maybe go in and test a few things, and from there you can rework your ads, and it's really about just figuring out what works for your business and your goals, I guess. Mhm. Yes. Okay. Thank you.